Today's big story in the world of business is the appointment of Lesetja Kganyago as Reserve Bank Governor, and the announcement by President Jacob Zuma has been trending throughout the day. And for more reaction to the news, we are joined by Liepollo Pheko, who is Executive Director at the NGO think tank and, of course, the Trade Collective. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The first basic question, is Lesetja Kganyago the right man for the job?
It seems so. I mean, he has the correct qualifications. He understands markets. He understands, financial management very clearly. He has been a Director General previously at the Finance Ministry under Minister Manuel, in fact, and Minister Gordhan, and then he soon moved to the Reserve Bank, or went back to the Reserve Bank. He also understands quite clearly the kind of trends, the economic trends that take place around the world, and where South Africa is positioned currently. And I think that at a time such as this, when our economy has taken a bit of a pounding, when our growth rates are extremely sluggish, it might be useful to have somebody who has the experience, the insider experience, and also some kind of global vision as well.
What do you make of the delayed announcement? Because speculation was rife that there was a problem with choosing who should succeed Gill Marcus, and of course maybe an outsider would be perhaps a formidable figure to take over.
Well, look, I think that there will always be that kind of internal gossip or that kind of speculation. The last time, in fact, that there was somebody who was promoted from within was Governor Chris Stoltz. That's going back years and years and years in this country. So I suppose, there'll always be a pool of people who could be selected. I am a bit concerned, however, that although I welcome, and I think many people welcome the announcement in terms of stability, the markets welcomed the announcement. The rand reacted very well, in fact, and I think that this is a good thing. I think one might be a bit concerned that we may be seeing, a continuation, perhaps, of a model that has been not particularly dynamic over the last few years, which has not assisted South Africa in coming out of the stagnation of our economic growth that we've been in. So I'd be interested to see what kind of creativity and newness that Mr. Kganyago can bring to the Reserve Bank at this time.
Well, I'm glad that you spoke about Chris Stoltz, but then let's look at the trend after him, the era of Tito Mboweni, especially with the controversial inflation targeting and looking at the stormy times the economy has had during the instability in world markets. As you remember that many people were saying that we are in a recession and it's going to be hard to come out. Up to so far, how do you think the Lesetja Kganyago is going to cope with the challenges that are facing the Reserve Bank?
I'm not sure, but perhaps to allude to my previous remarks and to connect that, I do think that inflation targeting has seen its best days, and I think as a fiscal instrument which is intended to grow the economy, it's extremely limited. It has, inflation is only as good as our current economic performance. It also indicates a level of poor economic performance, a lack of dynamism, poor manufacturing, poor agricultural, and poor productivity. And all of these things can either spike or decrease inflation. Using the inflation alone as an instrument upon which to measure our economy has really been unsatisfactory, not only over the last 5 or 6 years, over the past 20 years. And I think that we can see that the fact that our economy has not responded very well to the global exigencies and the shocks since 2008 in particular would have suggested that perhaps we should try something different. I've always been a proponent of perhaps things like capital and currency controls, for example. Things like, education targeting, unemployment targeting, etc., because those are the things that really help an economy to either grow or to stagnate.
Now, we've talked about some internal pressures in as far as inflation is concerned, but then what about exogenous factors, especially the international pressures on the South African economy?
But you see, if we use our internal instruments more effectively, if we're able to, for example, to determine how much currency, how much foreign exchange we allow into the international markets, these are some of the things that value, appreciate, or depreciate our currencies. And when our currency is in a state, the kind of state of very, very, very weak as it has been now, mainly because it is oversaturated in global markets, there are times when one has to use different sorts of instruments. China, for example, often use drawback on their currencies to ensure that their currency, the yuan, remains strong, and to ensure that then their productivity is not hampered by very high import costs. So those are the sorts of things that I think we need to be looking at.
When we look at emerging economies, like for example, as if you draw a parallel between South Africa and Brazil, for example, they are now in a recession, and of course South Africa is still doing well. When you look at, for example, concepts like tapering in the United States that affect emerging economies, currencies and all that, going into the last quarter of this year, how do you think the economy is going to cope, looking at maybe perhaps the expected announcement of the MPC in the last days of the year?
So I think that the economy is going to continue at an even keel. We only hope that there isn't going to be an additional downgrade between now and the end of the year. That would certainly be extremely difficult for the economy to cope with. I also suspect that America's own current resurgence is a bit of a bubble in and of itself, so one wouldn't want to lay too much stock on that. I suspect that our employment figures will remain exactly as they are, despite hopes and noises, particularly from the cabinet, that we're going to begin to see decreased figures. I highly doubt it. I think that it would be completely counter-cyclical. It would go against everything that has been happening over the last few years. But also in terms of global trends, it would also be completely counter-cyclical.
Okay, just on a parting shot, do you think this interest hiking cycle will continue?
I think so.
Right. Thank you very much for talking to us. I'm talking here to Liepollo Pheko, who is Executive Director at the NGO think tank, the Trade Collective, right here on PM News. Moving